All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Blaine Husengay. I am a crime victim advocate with Lutheran Community Services Northwest, and my cohort is Chris. Chris, go ahead and introduce yourself there.
Hi, everybody. Good to have you here today. I'm Christina Hammond, and I lead the Later in Life and Vulnerable Adult Project here at Lutheran Community Services. So since we're going to get started, I just want to welcome everybody for coming and being a part of this. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and most people think of domestic violence as intimate partner. And we just wanted to highlight that domestic violence isn't always intimate partner domestic or violence, that it is also later in life sometimes, as well as vulnerable adults. It is somebody who you have a family relationship with or a household member. We're going to go into a little bit more in depth of later in life abuse. And so, I was going to let you know that if you put questions in the chat box, that will be wonderful. We're going to do a question and answer after the presentation. And now I'll pass it on to Blaine.
Thanks, Chris. All right, like Chris said, that violence unfortunately happens across the lifespan and across ability levels and disabilities. And we want to just kind of give an overview of not only that aspect, but also our overall agency, what advocacy looks like. We'll get in a little bit deeper dive into those forms of abuse, including who the abusers are, mandated reports, and our role in that. And then more specifics in regards to advocacy and how we provide services. All right. So I'd like to start off with a little bit of the history of LCS. So our agency has had a really long history of assisting folks who are needing help and underrepresented, those that have maybe largely been ignored by society. In the 1940s, the preludes of what would become our agency were assisting refugees of war in Eastern Europe, offering housing and adoption services. A decade later, the focus would include family and marriage counseling and mental health services. Our Spokane office opened in 1956 with that focus. Lutheran Welfare Society would later become Lutheran Social Services. Independently, the Spokane Rape Crisis Center was formed in the 1970s. This newly found group of advocates would later morph into the advocacy team at LCS. In 2001, two independent Lutheran organizations, Lutheran Social Services operating in Idaho and Eastern Washington, and Lutheran Family Service operating in Oregon and Western Washington, would combine to what is now Lutheran Community Services Northwest.
We'd like to briefly go over the various programs here at our Spokane office. We have our behavioral health team. They do clinical therapy with licensed therapists. They employ evidence-based practices such as EMDR, CBT, CBT plus, trauma-focused CBT, motivational interviewing, and others. We also have our WISE team, which is support for youth and families who are undergoing a behavioral or mental health crisis. We have our focus team, the Family Outreach Crisis Intervention Services. It is a 1-month in-depth diversion from hospital. So if somebody's going through a crisis, and this is to prevent somebody to being in the hospital. We also have our program specialty, which is problematic sexualized behaviors. We have treatment for that. We have our foster care program, which The program is to assist in ensuring use, that they can have adequate care, and that parents can be guided through process. URM can facilitate those minors seeking refuge so that they can have independence and work towards both education and independence. Domestic foster care works with the Washington State and also certified foster parents to supplement or to support youths who may have complex behavioral needs through extensive case management. Victim advocacy, several specialized programs, all offering medical, legal, and general victim advocacy. We have a 24/7 support crisis line. We do community outreach and education to other services for victims, such as court, law enforcement, and other service providers. We have a robust volunteer program that allows others to learn and assist those who are going through crisis. So why do we have a dedicated program for later in life and vulnerable adults, and why here in Spokane? In 2018 in Spokane County, there were over 115,000 people who were over the age of 60. In 2020, there were over 122,000 people who are in this population. And the 10-year prediction for this there will be about 145,000 people. That is a huge increase. With that increase comes higher numbers of calls to adult protective services. There were 60,000 reports of vulnerable adult abandonment, abuse, neglect, financial exploitation, and self-neglect were received by Washington's Adult Protective Services. That's a sharp increase from the 48,000 reports received in 2017, and more than triple the 19,000 reports that were made in 2012. APS is limited to helping only those who fit under the legal definition for aging services, which is 60 years or older and with a disability. There are a great many people who don't quite reach this, but they consider themselves vulnerable.
Thanks, Chris. So now let's spend a little time talking about, in this form of domestic violence, who are the most common abusers. So in almost 60% of elder abuse and neglect incidents, the perpetrator is a family member. 2/3 of perpetrators are adult children or spouses. Strangers are more likely to commit stalking, sexual assault, and financial scams. Many caregivers do have stress while caring for a loved one, but that stress should not be used as an excuse for committing abuse or neglect. The abuse is about an imbalance of power and entitlement thinking patterns. If you know someone who needs support to perform their caregiving duties, encourage them to call Community Living Connections. There are classes and support groups to help.
Thank you, Blaine. Just like intimate partner violence, abuse that occurs later in life or to a vulnerable adult is about power and control. It is based on the relationship the abuser has with the victim. It relies heavily on guilt and coercion. Self-blame and natural life changes can be barriers to seeking assistance. And we'll go into a little more thorough definitions of that abuse. We are using the power and control wheel of people with disabilities and their caregivers. And it can also apply to those who are later in life. Caregiver privilege. There are several different ways this can look. Treating a person as a child or a servant, making all of the decisions for them. defining narrow and limiting roles and responsibilities, providing care in a way that accentuates the person's dependence and vulnerability, giving an opinion as if it were the person's opinion, denying the right to privacy, ignoring, discouraging, or prohibiting the exercise of full capabilities. So looking at those a little bit deeper, let's look at one, denying the right to privacy. Sometimes in a home, somebody may not have the ability to lock the bathroom door. That can be very abusive in one way. It's a way to start that caregiver privilege, taking away a person's right to have that privacy or have those decisions made for themselves. There's coercion and threats, physically threatening to hurt a person or withhold basic support and rights. And with that, that can be medications or trips to the doctor. Terminate relationships and leave the person unattended. Report non-compliance with a program. So if it is somebody that's vulnerable and they are in a program where they're the support of having a caregiver in their home, if they're not complying, that might mean that they would no longer have a caregiver. So that is a way to coerce somebody into doing what you want them to do. Using consequences and punishments to gain compliant behavior. Pressuring the person to engage in fraud or other crimes. It sounds unlikely, but it's actually very prevalent. Say a person just had a spouse that passed away and their caregiver might try to coerce them into not letting Social Security know that the checks are still coming to the house so that the caregiver can take that money. So that is a way to pressure them into that, to doing things that they wouldn't normally do. There's also intimidation, raising a hand or using looks, actions, or gestures to create fear. Having that signal where you know somebody's very angry at you. Destroying property or abusing pets. I have seen families where they've actually hidden property that were very important to the person who was later in life, and holding it so that they would do whatever the caregiver wanted them to do. Mistreating service animals. If you mistreat the service animal, it no longer does its service work, and that puts the person in jeopardy. So mistreating the service animal is a way that somebody would actually try to intimidate a person who's later in life, or somebody who's vulnerable. Displaying weapons is another way to intimidate. Emotional abuse, punishing or ridiculing, refusing to speak or ignoring requests, ridiculing a person's culture, tradition, religions, and personal tastes. I've seen families or caregivers prevent somebody who's later in life from actually going to church, where they might actually get additional support. Enforcing a negative reinforcement program or any behavior that the person does not consent to.
Thanks, Chris. All right, as we continue on the caregiver power and control wheel, I just wanted to throw out there that although this is specific towards caregivers, that a lot of these are also part of the later in life abuse and control. The difference is sometimes that it can be a family member and they use very similar tactics to wield that power and control. So as we kind of go around economic abuse, using persons' property and money for staff's benefit, stealing, using property and or money as a reward or punishment in a behavior program, making financial decisions based on agency or family needs, limiting access to information or financial information and resources, resulting in unnecessary impoverishment. So this, whether it's later life or vulnerable adults, there does seem to be a common theme of entitlement, especially when it's later life adult child abuse. There can just be a lot of feeling very used to having that be the situation of having the rights and access to the person's finances or other things. Withhold, misuse, or delay needed supports. As Chris had mentioned, using medication to sedate the person, not just withholding it for convenience. Ignoring equipment safety requirements. Breaking or not fixing adaptive equipment. Refusing to use or destroying communication devices. Withdrawing care or equipment to immobilize the person. Using equipment to torture people. Minimize, justify, and blame. Denying or making light of the abuse. Denying the physical and emotional pain of people with disabilities. Justifying rules that limit autonomy, dignity, and relationships for programs' operational efficiency. Excusing abuse as behavior management or as due to caregiver stress. Again, there's this misinformation historically that caregivers just get so mad that they start abusing the person that they're taking care of, and that's just not true. Although somebody may be suffering from caregiver stress, that does not justify any kind of abuse or violence. Blaming the disability for abuse, saying the person is just not a good reporter or reliable reporter of abuse. And lastly, isolation, controlling access to friends, family, and neighbors, controlling access to the phone, TV, news, limiting employment possibilities because of caregiver schedule, discouraging contact with case manager or advocate. And right now we're putting up a poll just to see if, after just going through the power and control wheel, was there kind of the knowledge out there? Seeing how many folks knew about all these, or if this is new information for folks. So it looks like was almost 50-50. Now we're a little bit more informative. All right, thanks for those that took the poll there. We're going to move on now to the mandatory report section. So one of our roles as victim advocates is the aspect of making sure people know about the agencies in the community there to help. So we, our goal is really to ensure those we work with can access assistance and understand our role in guiding to the appropriate help. While we do remain confidential, we're upfront when starting to work with someone that is mandated reporters. We're legally obliged to break confidentiality if they, as a vulnerable adult or someone they know to be a minor or vulnerable person, is or could be in immediate danger and do have to make that report. When this occurs, we offer to make that call with them so that they may be a part of that process and know really exactly what is said. And here are any of the information for APS. And with that, I'll hand it off to you, Chris.
Thank you. So through community-based advocacy, we focus on the autonomy, independence, and resilience of those we work with. Our approach is research and evidence supported, empowerment-based, and client-defined. In order to offer the best support, we aim to understand what the person's needs are, offer options as they are available, and support their own ability to make decisions. If there's a lack of capacity, we work to understand their wants and needs, and we can work with those who are supporting their decision-making to know their rights in accessing support. Working with an advocate at LCS is completely voluntary and at will. We do not give legal advice or tell people what to do. If they choose to call our 24-hour support line, our office, they can remain completely anonymous through texting or a phone call. We can talk about ways, depending on the situation, that you can do things to make yourself safer or help them be safer, or link to community resources that may assist in their particular circumstance. Our services are free and confidential, depending on our need or on the needs of the individual and what assistance that they need. Advocates might be available to meet in our office or in a public space, such as the courthouse. We can plan for safety and do other things that we typically assist people with, such as protection orders, interviews with law enforcement, during court hearings, whether it's either civil or criminal cases, medical appointments, ensuring that people know what types of medical assistance and information that they're entitled to under Washington state law. You do not need to identify as a victim in order to get assistance from an advocate. If you know somebody who may be experiencing stalking, harassment, or other forms of controlling behavior, you're welcome to ask to be connected to an advocate, depending on the specifics of the crime or the potential crime. Through working with an advocate, we can refer folks to see if they qualify for legal assistance or referral. So that means that we can work with secondaries. Say it is a child assisting a parent, we can be there for support of that child if the parent is not capable of making some decisions. And I will let you handle the next explain.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. So what can an advocate really do? So as Chris mentioned, there's some things that we can plan for safety, but our role is somewhat dynamic in that there's no prescribed timeline or specific way we approach working with each individual. We offer different avenues of support based on their needs. For instance, safety planning, which involves discussing things within their control that they can do to feel safer. For instance, like having an emergency bag packed with important documents and sundries if it is possible or necessary to escape a harmful situation. Maybe finding a friend or someone they may discreetly call to alert law enforcement to a dangerous situation going on, or simply talking through options they may have not considered, like filing a protection order. We can provide information about other supports in the community, like APS, special mobility services, or other organizations like elder services that may meet their needs. Sometimes our role is just to listen to what a client is going through and be a calming, caring voice to those that may not want to be able to have a fix to their situation. The client really gets to determine how much or little we support them.
So how does somebody refer someone to us? The easiest way for folks to get connected is to call the crisis support hotline. Texting is available during our normal business hours, which are 8 to 5 Monday through Thursday and 8:30 to 3 on Fridays. If they prefer us to contact them, and you are another service worker, check in with that person just to make sure that they want to have a call from us and that it's safe to have a call from us. and then let us know, and we can call them directly. If someone who self-identifies as later in life or a vulnerable adult might not feel safe at home or have questions on what options they have, then they can call the 24-hour support line, which is 509-624-7273 for immediate assistance. Often the lack of reaching out is due to a sense of hopelessness, or because they might blame themselves for what is happening in their lives.
Thanks, Chris. So we'll take some questions here in just a little bit, but if you would rather not ask questions here in this forum, feel free to call our office line at 509-747-8224. Our staff definitely is available to answer questions. If you have concerns or just want to talk through situations with an advocate, our office line is also confidential within Advocacy. And we want to thank you for giving us your time and allowing us to share our work with you. Our mission at LCS is to partner with individuals, families, and communities towards health, justice, and hope.
Wayne, can you put the APS slide back up, the mandated reports?
Sure.
It looks like Luke was requesting that information. And yes, this recording, I believe, is going to be available.
Yeah, we'll try to make sure the recording can be available for folks who may not have attended. Good, I'm glad to see that most people know if they're a mandated reporter. All right.
And I believe we had a question about privileged communication as well. As a victim advocate, we have communication, what is called privileged communication. So unless a client asks us to speak with somebody else on their behalf, we cannot. We try to get either written permission or verbal permission from the client themselves. Sometimes a judge could subpoena us for information, but that is highly unlikely. They have to weigh the victim's security and right to privacy in making that decision. So a person can come to us and tell us things that's going on, and we can help them make decisions about things without actually having to call law enforcement unless it is a mandated report. But as Blaine said, we try to actually work with the client so that they're with us when we do that. I hope that information was helpful.
So Blaine and Christina, it looks like we've got a couple of more questions coming in here. Taylor's got a question about working with folks with cognitive challenges, somebody especially that's got dementia. And, you know, if you're suspecting abuse, how should we approach supporting someone like that may not understand that they're being abused?
I think that's a great question. And we, what I've typically done if somebody is having, whether it's mild cognitive impairment or full dementia, is kind of work with them in what they're experiencing. If they're experiencing harm, making sure they know what kind of information they can, present to APS when we make that, report together. Sometimes it's not, there's not an easy answer. Like I said, sometimes our role is is listening, making sure they know about the supports available, things they may do. Chris may have some other insight into those kind of challenges.
Yeah, there's a lot of times that we have to pull in or ask the client if they have somebody that is supportive of them, that we can actually pull that person in to help with the safety plan. And you're right, a lot of times people don't realize that they are going through that abuse. So having that support person that can kind of show them gently is helpful, but sometimes that support person is who we need to help work with that client. Because a lot of times the safety that you might normally get with somebody who's a little more autonomous and has greater capacity, we might not be able to get them as safe as possible on their own. So assisting with them with that support person, maybe a neighbor, maybe it is a family member that might be a little bit distant. I'm looking to see if there's any more questions.
And I think you just touched on this a bit earlier, but that 24-hour support line, is that something that's available to support persons or loved ones that are looking for some direction or guidance around how to support someone being abused?
It is. All of our, whether it is the advocates that work during the day or if it is our volunteers at night, have been trained on how to support people who are later in life and vulnerable. So they definitely can call, support people can call. We encourage it. That is the best way to start protecting somebody.
Often too, we kind of mentioned a little bit about this, but those who may be experiencing a harm may not want to admit that there's a problem or try to say that they're a victim. And we really do support, even though our title is victim advocacy or victim advocates, you do not have to identify as a victim of a crime to receive support. It may just be talking about a situation that you think is could be harmful or want to talk about, things that you may want to understand what your rights are. I think the other thing that's maybe a little bit more unique about this project is that we do really try to work with those, like we've mentioned, who have either mild cognitive impairment or just needs time to be able to really talk through and process what their situation may be that's going on. Chris and I have that experience, as well as a lot of the advocates in our team, of understanding that somebody may be reaching out and not immediately wanting to share about what's happening. So we understand that it does take time to work with somebody and give them any accommodations or things that they need to have that space to talk about what's happening or to talk about situations and avenues of support that are out there.
And I just wanted to say that we are there to support each person individually, the way that they present themselves. They don't actually have to have called law enforcement. There doesn't need to be a police report. We don't mandate that somebody has that police report unless they are vulnerable and we have to do the mandated report. But if they're capable of making their decisions and they don't fit under that legal definition, and they still want support, we're there for them. And they, like I said, they do not have to report to law enforcement. And on the other side of that, say they have tried to report to law enforcement and law enforcement has come out and maybe law enforcement doesn't believe them or don't have a lot of things that they can do. So maybe they didn't say that there was an actual crime that was committed. So that they just have to say that they are a victim of abuse. They don't have to meet a legal definition of a crime for them to actually get services from us as a crime victim advocate.
All right, any other questions, anyone? Feel free, if you'd like to unmute, you're welcome to ask questions if that's an easier way of doing that too. All right, well, if there's no questions, we really want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak and present to you, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone.